You're out on a big ride, you're having a great time on your bike, and then bang, out of nowhere, your quad or your calf, it locks up and you're off the bike, cramping like crazy, trying to get it to stop. If that sounds familiar, then this video is for you. I'm going to be going through what actually causes cramp, and I'm going to explain how to prevent it and what to do if you do cramp. We're going to start off with some science, and I'm going to try and break it down for you, keep it super simple so you understand what is going on here. So, the prevailing theory at the moment is called the neuromuscular fatigue theory, and this is what sports science believes at the moment causes cramps to the best of our knowledge. And basically, your body is full of nerves. Your nerves carry the signals, from your brain down your spine through your nervous system, sending electrical impulses to tell you to contract a muscle, to push your leg down on the pedal stroke. When you get fatigued, basically, the theory goes that the signals coming from your spine down those nerves into like your quad, let's say, they get a bit messed up because you're getting tired, because you're getting fatigued. And what happens is there's two types of signal that go to a muscle. There's the signal to contract the muscle, okay, to make it shorter, to tense it. And then there's also the signal to relax it. So in a pedal stroke, we've got the contraction as we push down, and then that relaxation that lets it lengthen while the muscles on the opposite side start working. That's how it works. They work in opposing pairs. So your quad and your hamstring work together. As your quad, generally speaking and simplistically, as your quad is tensing, often your hamstring will be relaxing, and the nervous system is coordinating those things. As you get fatigued, those signals get a bit jammed up basically, and it's sending too many of the contract signals to the muscle. Contract, remember, being shorten, tense up, and not enough of the relax, the chill signal that's telling it to switch off, and it can relax and it can lengthen. So that, in a nutshell, is the neuromuscular fatigue theory. Now, the things that are going to actually cause this to happen are kind of predictable. You've experienced it yourself. So overexertion, doing higher intensity or greater distance or duration than maybe you're used to. These things don't happen, these cramps don't happen at a moderate intensity, when you're doing a 20k ride, when you can normally do a 40k ride. These things happen when you ride further than normal, harder than normal, and which is why it's so common in races or events where, guess what, that race day excitement, that motivation, you sprint a bit harder, you grind out the climbs a bit faster, and all of a sudden we tip the balance the wrong way. That fatigue kicks in and your nervous system says no, and it locks it up to try and protect you, okay, as the signals get a bit jammed up as part of the fatigue process. We're going to jump now into my kitchen, and we're going to talk about the bit that you're probably all expecting, which is to talk about hydration and its role in preventing cramp. So when we talk about cramp, this is a thing that most people go to straight away. And traditionally, this has been like the only approach to solving cramp, is to drink more and to use things like hydration tabs, okay, like this, to add electrolytes, or basically salts, to your drink in order to maintain a good level of hydration and, in theory, ward off cramp. And when you talk to your riding friends, there's always someone who swears by it. They always have a banana for the potassium. They use the hydration tabs and the energy powders with salts added to them. Maybe they add extra salt to their pre-ride meal, and they swear by that as preventing cramp. But the science is a little more mixed. Now, there are studies on one hand that show in athletes who cramp in endurance events have lower sodium levels in their blood, i.e., sodium, salt, electrolytes, just use it interchangeably to keep it simple, compared to runners or athletes who didn't cramp, for instance. So there's certainly some sort of correlation there. But on the other hand, we definitely have times where athletes in pro sport with nutritionists, and they're well hydrated, they're well looked after, and they still cramp despite having pro level support to try and prevent things like this happening. And to me, that suggests that there's something more to it than simply just hydration. Having said that, we're not just going to completely rule out hydration as a contributing factor of cramp during exercise, or in your case, mountain biking. So first of all, are you a heavy sweater? When you're out on that group ride, do you sweat, on the same day for the same rough output? Are you a bit sweatier than the other people on your ride? If you are, then you may need to take more notice of this. Similarly, if as part of that sweating, you excrete a larger amount of salt and you get like white marks on your jersey, or maybe even through your shorts where you're excreting a large amount of salt in your sweat, then again, you are potentially losing more salts and more fluid as part of normal riding than other riders of a similar size doing a similar amount of work. And that, regardless of cramp, is going to put a bigger demand on you to stay hydrated. Again, using tabs or just straightforward table salt in order to support your riding. Now, here's the thing, I like to be pragmatic and keep things simple. I believe this may contribute to cramp in some riders, but even if it doesn't, we want to be hydrated anyway, because we all know it's going to improve your mental and physical performance. So if you're doing a long ride or a hard ride or a race, then if you get dehydrated, your performance drops off and your ability to focus and be mentally alert also drops off. So we need to be hydrated anyway. So what's the takeaway from this? What's the thing that we can actually learn? And I believe, and from my experience and from what I've read, that hydration and your concentration of electrolytes are a contributing factor for some riders on whether or not they get cramp. But it still only happens when you are fatigued, when your muscles are stressed. Okay, so to me, the big factor here is that neuromuscular fatigue theory, okay, which I talked about already in the video, exceeding what your muscles and what your physiology is capable of normally and putting it under stress. And then when you're dehydrated and your sodium levels are down, it then causes some people, okay, so they work together, not in isolation, to cramp. Okay, so the takeaway is, obviously, if you're going riding and you want to compete, if you want to perform, you need to be hydrated. If you cramp a lot, if you sweat a lot, if you have those white marks because you lose a lot of salt, then you're going to need to put extra efforts into maintaining hydration when you go out riding, and it may, hopefully, help to reduce the onset of cramp. Now, as well as the neuromuscular fatigue theory and possibly hydration, there are a few other indicators that can potentially increase your risk of cramping. And the first one is a history of cramping. So if you're someone who gets cramp all the time, that isn't very helpful, because you probably already know, is that if you're someone who tends to have a lot of cramps on previous rides, then you're more likely to have cramps in the future, unless, hopefully, you do something about it. Other things would be poor sleep, elevated stress, poor nutrition status, basically anything that's just going to mean you're going out riding at an intense level or for a greater duration when you're not quite at your peak. So if you're tired, if you're stressed, if you haven't eaten, if you're dehydrated, or you're going in with, fatigue from training, then there's a greater likelihood that you are going to cramp on your ride. Here's the bit you've been waiting for. How are we going to prevent cramps? How are we going to improve it so they don't wreck your rides? So let's start on the actual ride, and let's talk about pacing your ride. If you know that your ride is going to be maybe 5, 10, 15k or a couple of hours longer than your normal rides and you are prone to cramping, then start the ride slower. Pace the ride slower, making sure obviously to eat and hydrate in the early parts of the ride, so that in the second half of the ride, when you're exceeding the riding you've done in the past, that's that risk zone, that you're going into that part of the ride with less fatigue and with enough calories and well hydrated so that everything can be functioning, and basically you've got less fatigue, less likelihood of cramping. So if you're going to ride further, then let's think about pacing. In a similar vein, if you're a racer and you're racing enduro and that mid-stage sprint causes you to cramp up, or you're racing downhill and you're cramping at the bottom of a hill, then actually, can we pace that differently? And this is something I've worked with a number of racers with in the past and given advice to people online, is that, yeah, they're getting cramped up at the end of a long enduro stage when there's a fire road sprint. And what I say is, well, yeah, you're competitive, so you're giving it 100% on that sprint. And maybe that 100% sprint rather than a 90% sprint saves you a second, or maybe even 2 seconds on the fire road if you're really powerful. But then how much do you lose if you then cramp at the bottom and you can't ride properly? 5 seconds, 10 seconds. So actually, hold a bit back on the sprint. Pace yourself a little better So you just don't quite stress and strain the body so hard that it goes into that protective cramp mode. And then, yes, you could have sprinted harder on the fire road, you could have been a second quicker, but actually on average, your stage times are going to be better. So you need to pace those race runs better. Now, what can we do off the bike in your training to help prevent cramps? And look, here's the big one. Probably the most effective thing in this video is going to be strength training, is getting stronger. Now, it's probably not a big shock that I'm going to say that, as I believe every mountain biker should strength train, and in fact every human should do some sort of strength training as well. It just makes everything better. But getting back to cramp, what we're trying to do is raise that threshold of what your muscles can do, how much work they can do, how much force they can create, so that when you're doing that race, doing that event, or just doing the big ride, your ceiling is a bit higher. Because it's when we get close to that ceiling or exceed it that that fatigue really kicks in, and then we cramp. So if I'm stronger and I move that ceiling up, I've now got more potential to do more work, to do higher intensity riding or racing, before the body then says, oh, no, that's too much. And then it responds by cramping you up and ruining your race or ruining your day. In terms of what that strength training looks like, it's going to vary a lot depending on where you're starting from. For some riders, it may be as simple as some single leg and like body weight work, like training in your garage, use some resistance bands. And if that's where you're starting from and it means you get stronger, then brilliant. If you're already strong or doing a little bit in the gym, then maybe you need to turn up the weights a bit, focus a bit more on strength, drop the reps, okay? So we focus on that high output work. The other thing that may help is to do more eccentric training. And what eccentric means is training where we lengthen the muscle under tension. So a great example of this for the hamstring would be an RDL, a Romanian deadlift, where we slowly lower the weight down so we're eccentrically working the hamstring, so we're lengthening it under tension, which is actually what makes you so sore when you do those. So if you don't already do it, then strength training is going to really help to prevent your cramp. If you do already do some strength training, then maybe think about dropping the weights to focus more on strength, so 3 to 5 reps instead of maybe 8 to 15 or something, and try and incorporate some eccentric or lowering or slow movements into your training to make you more robust and less likely to cramp. If the dreaded cramp does kick in, then what can you do about it? Well, instinctively, you kind of already know, and most people would go to do this anyway, and that is to gently try and stretch it out. And I say gently because if it's all locked in and tight, then it's already got loads of tension. We don't want to really aggressively stretch it, okay? It's just not going to like that. It's just going to fight against it. So we're going to get all chill. We're going to be like all yogi. Deep breaths. We want to be calm. We want to relax. Just like if you do any stretching or yoga or mobility at home, you want to be zen. You want to be chill. Take a deep breath, which is hard if it hurts and you're cramping loads, and then gently try and stretch it out, okay? And that's just going to help to turn it all off, because everything's already excited and wound up and like, so we want to be the opposite. We want to be chill, okay? Easier said than done, but in my experience, that is the best approach to get rid of them. Everything I've talked about so far is basically supported by up-to-date sports science and the current thinking amongst coaches and sports therapists and things like that. But this next bit is actually just from my experience, and I can't really prove it, except that I believe that especially in people who cramp a lot, there's a bit of a mental element to it. That expectation that I always cramp is what they're telling themselves, and they go out on a ride or a race or whatever expecting for it to be spoiled and to go and cramp. And I understand why. If it's happened a lot of times, well, you're like, well, it happened those 3 times, it's probably going to happen today. And the more you go out with that mindset, the more likely you are to cramp, in my opinion. So how can we change that? Let's reframe it. I have cramped in the past. It spoiled some rides, but I'm hydrating myself. I'm doing a warm up. I've been doing some strength training, and there's no reason why I'm going to cramp today. But if it does, I'm going to deal with it. We basically just want to tone it down, make it less of a big deal. Because actually, we don't want that stress, that anxiety, because guess what? Stress and anxiety makes everything get tense and tight anyway, which is the exact opposite of what we want. So just try and change your mindset a bit. And if you get those early warning signs, maybe that little twitch in the muscle, that little bit of tightness that's coming, at that point you can either go, oh, I'm going to get cramp, and get like angry and just bring it on, or you just pause a second, take some breaths, be like, no, it's not going to, and just try and give yourself some positive talk. Like I said, I think there's something to it. It's something I've used and discussed with plenty of riders in the last decade. Some have really found it valuable, some think it's total nonsense. It's up to you, give it a try. So there you go. I hope you've got a better understanding now of what's causing your muscle cramps and what you can do about it. If you've got any questions, then please do get in touch. I'm also producing a real simple crib sheet that's just going to summarize all of this, so you don't have to watch this video again and again. So if you've got any questions about that as well, then also just get back to me. I always reply to everyone. Thanks.